Let's give the week a hefty strategic launch with the big brains of the industry. They're paid to decipher the federal government's often indecipherable behavior. Michelle Austin is with Sumas Strategies, Marianne Carter with Environics Communications, and in Toronto, the mighty Robin Sears with Earnscliffe Strategy Group. Welcome to you all. What the heck, Michelle? Help me through this. You were away last week because you were sick, and you're still sick, but you're here, gamely fighting on.
I am.
Tell me how the government should deal with Trump. Should they start being more confrontational? Because they seem to be doing everything they can to avoid poking the bear.
Yeah, they've got a lot of balls up in the air for the trade file, right? And, you know, the positive thing for the government actually is it does tend to unify the opposition parties. He is a healthy addition, perhaps, to a very difficult week that the Liberals had last week in terms of Donald Trump. Mr. Trump is certainly focusing discussions for Canadians, not necessarily in a positive way, but he's focusing the parties to be very supportive of the government. So, you know, the government can just try and play the waiting game and hope that one of these falls apart in their favor, or they can keep trying to work very hard on each of these individual files. So, I mean, I think they haven't decided yet what they want to do.
I don't know. I heard a lot of people, Marianne, just anecdotally saying, for God's sakes, let's do something to fight back. This guy's deliberately picking a fight with Canada, and we just keep rolling over. But is that smart, or is that we got to resist the temptation to do that?
Well, I think the one thing to keep in mind is that there's a good number of Republicans really pushing back. I don't think we've seen anything like this with Paul Ryan, you know, taking a firm stance on this. And in fact, there's a joint letter by some very prominent Republican, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, as well as the chair of the subcommittee for trade. Yeah. And so there's a lot of pro-business Republicans who are very much against Trump's perspective. So while he's saying we're going to, I'm not listening to that, and I'm going to pave the way and put a tariff on steel, I think we'll see a hard push internally from the Republican Party before that gets through.
Interesting. All right, Robin, you know all. What should they do? Are they doing it the right way?
Smack him with a 2x4. It's the only way to deal with a bully.
Softwood lumber.
I mean, I really don't think that there's any alternative for a government of Canada to be seen to be playing patty cake with a cruel, aggressive American government. As Larry Herman said earlier, you know, we've never had a relationship this bad with the Americans. You don't make an abusive relationship better by allowing yourself to be abused. So I think if you're a fan of California Chardonnay, go out and get a couple of cases, because it's going to be a lot more expensive in a couple of weeks.
Okay. I want to move on to something that really weird happened last week, and I'll call for the poll to come up. Ipsos came out with a poll, and Michelle Austin euphorically would be dancing a jig here. The Conservatives
look at us.
Are ahead.
Don't we look so
of the
good?
Trudeau Liberals. I'll stick with you on this one, Robin Sears. Is this a rogue or is this reality?
I think it probably reflects the hit that he's taken, not unfairly, as a result of the India fiasco. But is it a predictor of the future? No. I mean, it's not going to tell us about next week, let alone next year, I don't think. There's a lot of road ahead. But I think it does reflect the fact that Canadians are sensitive to the performance of their political leaders. And this political leader has not been performing well.
Too early to get excited here, Michelle?
Yeah, unfortunately for my team, it's too early to get excited. But it really is going to be interesting to follow this in terms of the run-up to the next election. Is Justin Trudeau essentially running against himself? Yeah. Does Andrew Scheer need to do more, or does he just let Mr. Trudeau continue to do all of these tickle trunk tours that he's doing? And I think it's going to be really interesting for the Conservatives to work out a strategy around this. So the Liberals are one thing, but, well, do the Conservatives need to step it up? Well, maybe not so much anymore.
Just stay out of the way.
Yeah.
Well, there was this interesting thing that happened last week. The federal budget was released, and I don't think we've talked about it much more than 24 hours or 48 hours after.
Bring it up next, but go ahead.
But I think this goes to show, and we've discussed this before, the sort of balancing of the political theater piece, and when the Liberals are going to start coming out and really governing. The big criticism last year around this time is what have you gotten done? And so I think the fact that the India trip went so poorly and not only garnered national and international attention, I think the poll doesn't really surprise me that if there were an election called today, perhaps the Conservatives would do better than the Liberals. So.
All right, so what do you do for damage control if you're Justin Trudeau here, Robin?
Stop telling fibs. I mean, the one thing that these guys, among the things these guys don't seem to understand, is that when you're caught with a smoking gun over a corpse, you don't make up a story that pretends you had nothing to do with it. I mean, how could the Prime Minister's office have thought they could get away with A, blaming the Indians, B, blaming Daniel Jean, C, blaming a lowly BC MP for something that was entirely their fault? What you do in those situations is you apologize sincerely, authentically, quickly.
Yes, actually, we're going to talk about that with the press gallery, but that MP sort of said, that was thrown under the bus. Well, listen, I was 25, 30 people from my riding. They all wanted to go to this thing, so I just threw a blanket invite. So they lied. Is that what they got to stop doing, or is there something else they could do to bring those polling numbers back?
Well, it just sort of demonstrates the lack of control, right? There's people off doing different things, and it looked chaotic. And I think, the Prime Minister not showing up to question period the day he returned back, or the House returned back, it gave momentum to the opposition. And so it's kind of like, yes, and so it's, it comes to a point where you do need to take ownership and control. And I think, in some ways they did that with the Morneau situation. But I think they're not doing anything at this point to help themselves.
I'm sure you don't want to give them advice, but if you had to give them advice, what advice would you give the PMO? Yeah,
there's an element of lazy that has crept into this government in terms of how they position the Prime Minister. And his big think piece, the budget, fell flat, and so he can't really lean back on that. So I think they need to sort of go back to the drawing board and remind themselves why they are there to govern, not in ceremonial costumes, but to actually come forward with a lot more practical approaches, especially when people are a little bit more worried about the economy this week even than last week from the budget.
I was told there was like an army of chiefs of staffs for all these ministers and their people, so there was no one here in Ottawa attending shop while things were unraveling, so they didn't know. Anyway, that's another topic altogether. Last one, let's go to Italy for this one. There was an election yesterday in Italy. The populists won. The Five-Star Movement capitalized on a lot of voter anger and immigration phobia, if you will, and they have the most seats, but it remains to be seen what kind of government they can cobble together from all these various disparate groups. Robin Sears, you watch all these things very carefully. Is there any sign of what happened in Italy that could jump the Atlantic and actually have an impact on Canadian politics?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are some structural reasons that would be difficult. We have a first-past-the-post system. They have a very fractured PR system, which has all kinds of parties and regional tensions. We don't have 800,000 immigrants in the last 2 years, or whatever the number is, problem the way they do. We don't have a declining economy, a corrupt political class. I mean, the Italian political dilemma is deep and real and long-standing. I think the sad thing is, though, you might end up with a worst possible kind of coalition government with these crazies from the Five-Star Movement, combined with some very ugly crypto-fascists from the north, combined with some very corrupt friends of the former Prime Minister. I mean, it could be a really unpleasant government for the people of Italy, sadly.
Populist person over there?
That's a really interesting observation, given that his party is currently in a coalition with a populist party, the Green Party in British Columbia. Listen, I come from a very robust populist background. I came to Ottawa from the Reform Party. Populist movements are not, as Robin has described them, scary, alt-right. They're expressions of individuals who, in this case, are extremely frustrated with the European Union and with decisions that were made outside of Italy. So I think that the populist movement has never left Canada. It just, every now and then, it's a great check and balance to the traditional approach to parties.
So you see, or do you sense, Marianne, that this is contagious at all, or is Canada kind of a different kettle of fish?
Look, I think anything is possible in politics. I think we just look to our friends at the south of the border, and as a perfect example. What I find most interesting about the Italian election and the the shift to the right is, a couple of the leaders have come out and said they're very much against the euro and the European Union, and how will that impact our markets if Italy were to pull out of the EU, or go to these very protectionist style policies, and if that would have a ripple effect with other countries in the European Union. So I think that's more how Canada needs to be looking towards the Italian election down the road, to see how that could ultimately impact us with trade and so.
See, we had a good discussion about an Italian election and Canadian politics, Robin.
We're okay.
All right.
You know that lots of
Thank you
Canadian
all.
Italians got to vote in it.
That's true, they did.
Yeah.
All right, Robin, thank you. We appreciate that, and well to you too. We'll see you again soon.